So you've had a wearable like a watch, a Whoop, or an Oura Ring for a while now, and maybe you've gotten all you need out of it, or maybe you don't want one of these devices in the first place. How do you measure your recovery without depending on devices? I want to dive a little bit further into the topic that I covered in the comparison of the Whoop to the Apple Watch and Oura Ring and these wearable devices to figure out what is the point of all this data collection. And so I want to go into the specifics of what are some of the methods you can use to measure your recovery and performance without depending on these wearable devices. And at the end of the video, I'll share a template that you can copy right now to get started on visualizing your measurements. First, what is the point of gathering all this data? For some people, they find a lot of motivation in these numbers and using a fitness tracker to help them see their progress and have an objective number in mind when they are working on their health goals. This is really great if this is how you operate. You know that you're a numbers person and this data works for you. And also, as a health coach, when I'm working with clients, it's really helpful to have some objective measurements other than just their self-reporting in order to get more concrete evidence on the progress that they're making on their goals and where we can make adjustments. This can be especially important when they're new to making health changes or setting goals because they may not know exactly what cues or internal sensations or self-reporting is going to help them get the best progress. And some people despise numbers and having to track everything, and they just want to focus on how they qualitatively feel. This is ultimately what we want to work towards so that we can understand and build that interoception of how we are feeling, how we are recovering, and how we're performing without depending on a fitness tracker to tell us so. So we want to ditch the dependency on wearable data at some point so that it's not always dictating our feelings and emotions, even though we can still use it and compare it to our own feelings. And that's where step one comes in. We want to compare to a wearable tracker. Compare how you subjectively feel to what the data is telling you. If you're looking to limit your dependency on a device, start by pairing your feelings to the information that you gather, like your sleep score, your strain score, your readiness score, or your training load, all of these different metrics that are measured by whichever device you like using. Now, if you've been tracking for a while and exercising consistently and crushing it, this may sound really obvious to you, but for somebody that's new to fitness and health and tracking, this is something that they don't already have a strong internal sense of awareness of. So these objective measures that you get from the device can act as your guide wires to things like knowing what a full recovery, high recovery day feels like. What does it feel like when your sleep score is in the 80s or 90s or 100%? What does it feel like first thing in the morning as well as later on in the day when you've had a low sleep score or you didn't sleep well? And how do you feel in the minutes and hours or days after a really high strain effort? We can go on and on about all these different subjective feelings that we can develop from the data, but you get the idea that these measurements can then lead into building a greater sense of internal awareness of our state. And if there's something specifically that you need help tracking or understanding about your state, feel free to reach out and we can brainstorm ideas that are specific to you. So then the second step is to test, then confirm. You want to build that internal awareness by taking an educated guess now that you've been measuring and tracking for some time and comparing it to what the data tells you. There is a sneaky downside to always depending on a fitness tracker telling you how you're doing. Sometimes when everything is on the line, we have to perform regardless of what our fitness score or our readiness score or recovery looks like. And seeing those red numbers and that alarming suggestion that you need to take it easy when everything's on the line just doesn't cut it. This is a negative priming to the performance state that you're trying to get in for competition or for a presentation, whatever it may be, where you really have to make it happen regardless of your state. And this became really clear to me when I was competing in strongman, because I've been tracking some of these metrics with devices like chest strap, heart rate monitors, and even some of the measurements that my CPAP machine that I used for over a decade were telling me. But one thing that I realized that was super important to my psychological state going into a competition day was to never look at what the results of any device were before that competition. There's no upside to seeing that you're ready to perform, but there's tons of downside to seeing that maybe you're in a red line state, or your performance or your recovery score is not optimal. And this is often the case on competition days or days where we really need to make a count, because often the anxiety and the pre-competition jitters that come into place, or before a presentation or a big event, are going to affect your sleep and therefore your readiness to perform the next day. So this is where I started to realize the importance of looking at subjective measurements and letting those feelings come first before looking at the objective measurements that a device may be telling me. So create this distance for yourself. Maybe you still want to look at those numbers and understand what the data is telling you, but also turn to what your body's telling you first. Look at those things earlier in the day and then check the fitness tracker results later on. And we can turn this subjective data into something useful with two different methods. The first one is a simple pen and paper method. You're going to use a journal or a notebook or even just some lined paper or graph paper and draw out on the x-axis your days of the month, and on the y-axis it's going to be a 0 to 10 scale. We want to then use this to score yourself on a couple of different metrics. The three that I like to always use are my sleep score, my stress level score, and my energy score. I find that having these three numbers is more useful than just one of them, because it kind of meshes together to give you an overall sense of your readiness subjectively. Now, this isn't as fancy as what the algorithms in these fitness wearables put together, but if you look at the trends over time on what you see from this simple data, it tends to be pretty on point and accurate with how you are performing or ready to perform, and also giving you a clue to some of those indicators that it's time to back off or rest and recover a little bit more. You'll start to notice these patterns more in your lifestyle when you do this subjective measurement, in addition to tracking with a wearable that just spits out the numbers for you. And just once per day, you have to give yourself the score on how well did you sleep, what's your energy level look like, or what's your stress level look like. Use all three or add in any others that you want to get creative about that are going to help you to build this internal awareness. And I suggest doing these a couple hours, at least 1 hour or 90 minutes after waking up. I find that when we're in that groggy state of sleep inertia and just waking up is not the best time to judge our sleep quality. Rather, a few hours later is a little more useful and telling on how we actually slept. So then, like I said, over time, you'll start to get a better sense of how close you were based on what the fitness tracker is telling you. And you can also begin to debate with yourself on whether that information is actually useful or not, or is it giving you a recovery score that you don't agree with, you're able to push much harder, or are you feeling like you need to back off even though it's telling you that you're ready to go? Now, the second method is to use a spreadsheet or create a Notion dashboard like the one that I'm going to show you here. If it's easier or more convenient for you to record your recovery digitally, you can totally do that. And I like using Notion because it just works with the second brain system that I've already built and can just quickly jump to. I also like the way it visualizes the data, and I've put together a simple way to track these three scores, just like I would if I'm tracking it in a notebook, but it's in the Notion dashboard on a spreadsheet, and it'll spit out and visualize this data as well on a chart. So If you don't want to draw it by hand, or you would just rather keep it on a computer, you can totally do this. And I'm going to include the link in the description for you to access and duplicate this template of the recovery tracker for yourself. The other cool thing, which I haven't gone and done for myself yet, but I believe there are ways to do, is you can integrate some of your health data from Oura Ring, or maybe even from Apple Health or Whoop, and send it over to the spreadsheet as well. So if you wanted separate lines in the spreadsheet to keep track of what the objective measurements of the fitness wearable are telling you versus your subjective scores, there should be a way to do that. Or you can also just manually enter that if you want to have that direct comparison right in the same spreadsheet. So those are some of my thoughts on how we can go from being obsessed with our wearable data to having a better sense of ourselves. Let me know what your thoughts are on whether you do something similar, or you don't care about fitness tracking at all, or you just trust in the devices and follow what it tells you. And if you're new to exploring wearable tech and haven't seen it yet, check out this video here where I compare the 3 heavy hitters of the Whoop, the Apple Watch, and the Oura Ring.